everyone, I'm John Green. Just kidding, but how awesome would that be? Oh, and don't mind these glasses. I can see perfectly, they just make me feel smarter, and maybe it'll convince you that I actually know what I'm talking about. Anyways, welcome to Crash Course Literature. Today we'll be talking about The Great Gatsby by Francis Scott Fitzgerald through a biographical lens. Yes, me from the past?
What even is a biographical lens?
Oh, me from the past. Sometimes I forget how ignorant you were.
I would make fun of you, but it would take you the rest of the day to figure it out.
Good one, past me. That didn't hurt at all. So more relevantly, biographical lenses. Viewing a piece of literature through a lens can give the reader more insight on the meaning of the story and the overall message the author wants to convey. The biographical lens, as I have mentioned previously, involves various parallels between the novel and the author's life. Events, experiences, beliefs, and people are examples of what reflect the author in their writing, which helps us understand recurring themes and motifs. Fitzgerald's life and concerns are blatantly portrayed in aspects of his many eminent novels. Historians, in a documentary about Fitzgerald's life, even said that he was always the subject of his writing, and in the case of The Great Gatsby, he recreated himself as Gatsby. Nick observes that, on page 2, that if personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there is something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life. He used his own personal experiences in order to strengthen his conveyance of universal theme and messages, rather than make it more personal and narrow-minded. Moreover, he makes a significant choice of narrating through Nick and not Gatsby. He makes this decision because the storyline is seen through Nick's eyes as a bystander. The novel essentially recaptures what people were like during this time period and how everything was not as lavish as it might have seemed. Most of the time, Nick simply states his observations of what's happening, but sometimes he gives opinionated implications about what he thinks is happening. This allows the reader to interpret Gatsby as good and to avoid having Fitzgerald look like he's on a high pedestal. For example, Nick about Gatsby says on page 2, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. He separates himself by creating Tom, who is not well liked. Even though Tom came about his money honestly, he is an arrogant, sadistic man, an epitome of the regular wealthy man from this time period. While Gatsby is significantly more likable because of what Nick describes as his unwavering hope and hopeless romanticism. Personally, I would choose Gatsby over Tom just like that.
Oh, hello, old sport.
What? Jay Gatsby? Where did you come from?
From the foul dust that floated in the wake of my dreams.
Okay, well, as long as you're here, would you mind talking about your similarities with your creator, Francis Scott Fitzgerald?
Many of his novels reflected events from his life or the people surrounding him. For example, in his novel, Tender is the Night, he writes about his crumbling marriage with Zelda after she had an affair with a French pilot. In The Great Gatsby, however, his experiences in the war and other significant events with his wife make his way into his writing. He often criticized the wealthy, extravagant lifestyle of the Roaring Twenties, even though he couldn't avoid being tempted by it. He was lured into it by Zelda, whom he met while stationed in Alabama. They were engaged for a brief amount of time before she cut it off because Fitzgerald was simply not making enough money to satisfy her rich lifestyle needs. Similarly, he wrote about this with Gatsby and Daisy to signify the type of relationship he shared with Zelda, which exposed more parallels between the author and his writing. The timeline between himself and his novel was consistent because he wrote The Great Gatsby in 1925, which corresponds to the Roaring Twenties theme in the novel. And although he did live in Long Island, at one point he wrote Gatsby when he lived in Paris. He never liked to stay in one place. He always moved from place to place. He didn't like to stay in one place at all.
Okay, thanks, Gatsby. Towards the end of the novel, Fitzgerald decides to end it with a tragedy, even though the writing was set in the 1920s. This tragedy can be interpreted as Fitzgerald predicting the Great Depression that approached after World War I. as Foster mentioned in his book 25 Books That Shaped America, which would abruptly put an end to the flashy parties and wealth. Or it can be Fitzgerald stepping on the American dream and how it will never be truly attainable. He wrote about how Gatsby fought for it tooth and nail, yet he still was not able to reach it. Ugh. And now for the open letter. Dear Daisy Buchanan, you may as well have been just a pretty face because your personality resembled a wet rag. Although Fitzgerald wanted to symbolize you as a great American dream in his novel, I never really appreciated you, but I guess that was sort of the point. The American dream was supposed to be pure, but underneath it lay corruptness. This is the essence of your name because daisies are known for having a yellow center and white petals. White representing the purity of the American dream, and the yellow representing the corruptness of it. Gatsby even described you as having a voice full of money. Perhaps this American dream was also closely linked to Fitzgerald's wife Zelda, who yearned for wealth. Daisy, you never lived up to the dream that Gatsby fantastically made up in accordance to, well, me, even though it's arguable whether he realized it in the end. R.I.P. Gatsby, you'll be dearly missed. That concludes our open letter and sadly concludes our show. Join us next time on Crash Course.